Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents A Jacket Off the Gorge. True Story of the Biggest Liar by Susan Ashline. Narrated by Elisabeth Lagelee. This is a true story. Some names and identifying information have been changed to protect the privacy of individuals. Those names are indicated by an asterisk in the print and ebook formats of the book. A decision was made to change the names of some public officials, which includes police officers, judges, public defenders, and prosecutors, even though their names can readily be found on the public documents that are the foundation for this book. Introduction. This is the story of my life where it intersects with the life of Jon Fontaine, a man who was hiding stolen treasure and a severe criminal past. Why did I get involved with someone with such a reprehensible background? The answer is simple. I didn't know about it. I was already hooked by Jon when he gave me a watered-down version of his criminal history. It seemed so out of character, which led me to believe he was a changed man, so his past didn't matter. I didn't ask much about it at the time. I wanted to believe the bond I felt with Jon was real. I wanted it to be lasting. No one wants to think someone will break their heart or steal their $50,000. I learned the crime details only when I set out to write this book, traveling to multiple jurisdictions, talking to people, and collecting thousands of pages of court documents. This book is written from interviews with Jon, police statements by witnesses, victims, co-defendants, and co-conspirators, parole, criminal, and civil court documents and transcripts, personal and police video and audio recordings, letters, texts, and emails, and my own journal entries. Most of the conversations depicted are taken from these sources word for word. Some are near accurate, taken from my notes and Jon's recollection. To enhance scene building, some conversations that were originally carried out in texts or emails are portrayed as happening in person. I did not take fact-checking lightly and did my best to verify every piece of information. As a broadcast journalist for more than 25 years and an author of a true crime book, verifying information was natural for me. Plus, courts and crime had been my beat for a while. I'd spent nearly every day at the Hall of Justice covering hearings and trials, thinking I'd learned just about everything there is to know about the criminal justice process. While living this tale with Jon Fontaine, I became surprised at how much I didn't know. Those in the legal community repeat the cavalier response, "The criminal justice system isn't perfect." That's true, but to a far greater degree. I believe the criminal justice system is a systemic failure at every level. Why did I remain in a relationship with Jon? That answer isn't as easy. I don't have one, but I bounce around several theories. The one that makes the most sense is that I believed most of what Jon was showing me and setting me up to believe, even though I could identify isolated pieces that didn't fit. I was a goldfish, living in a fishbowl. All I knew was what Jon put in my bowl: a bridge, colored gravel, some plastic trees, and a live Java fern. Just enough of something real to make me believe my surroundings. But unfortunately, my life with him was whatever he designed my experience to be. One day, the fishbowl shattered. As I flopped on the floor among shards of glass, I was stunned to see there'd been all sorts of things happening around me, of which I'd been utterly unaware. A kitchen counter, cupboards, people, a cat, a toaster, windows with trees beyond them. I beat myself up over being fooled by him, until I realized that police had also been fooled. Police, parole, corrections officers, attorneys, and judges. Those whose job it is to study and understand the criminal mind, who worked with criminals every day of their career, were easily taken in by Jon's lies. He fooled virtually everyone who crossed his path. Jon boasted he was bad like Jesse James. Things didn't end well for Jesse James either. Part 1. Ghost, True Crime. August 28, 2000. Jon locked eyes on the border crossing and took off sprinting, a Canadian Mountie screaming, "Stop!" in the distance. His buddy Eddie raced alongside him. Flap, 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 flap. The sound of baggy denim pant cuffs slapping against each other. All Jon could focus on was getting past the border, his thoughts drowned out by the whipping of pant legs and his own huffing breath. The teens had done all they could to outrun Canadian police. Knowing the boundary could mean freedom or imprisonment in a foreign country. Jon Fontaine had violated probation by leaving the United States and was about to get caught in another country with a backpack stuffed with cash for a major drug buy. At 17, Jon had a robust weed-selling business, moving more than $30,000 worth of marijuana monthly. He went to high school sometimes, but the school desk was something to rattle his leg under, while his mind drifted to more rousing matters. Logistically planning his drug trafficking provided the intellectual stimulation he craved. It also paid rolls of cash, and bought a twisted sort of respect. Jon grew up in an area so sparsely populated that it could be a long walk to the nearest neighbor's house. Rural Wayne County in upstate New York. While it had pockets of commerce, novelty shops, fast food fare, gas stations, there were vast stretches of nothing but apple orchards, farm markets, and roadside stands. People who lived in Wayne County were commonly picked on for being country folk and mocked as 315ers, referring to the county's area code. The derision came mostly from those living in neighboring Monroe County, in the crowded city of Rochester and its suburbs. Yet many of those same people made Wayne County their day trip getaway for a walk through a pumpkin patch or corn maze, or a ride down the Erie Canal bike path. The county's northern border of Lake Ontario was a big draw, offering views of what looked like an ocean stretching to infinity. Living in Wayne County bored Jon, as did most things, so it wasn't difficult for two older boys to lure him into the drug trade in 8th grade, wowing him by fast financial gains and activating his intellectual acuity. Jon was more knowledgeable about marijuana than most, thanks to an unlikely tutor. He called his friend's father by his last name, Mr. Racy, the formality belying a deeper bond, more of a father and son. Racy was a laid-back hippie throwback. After coming home from the Vietnam War, he'd started stowing weed in truck wheels, making 36-hour nonstop piss-in-a-jug trips to El Paso. He was moving so much of the stuff that he had to get a partner, a commercial driver's license, and 2 semi-trucks, selling about 100 pounds of marijuana per weekend to bikers, lawyers, doctors, and eventually to Jon. In the spring of 2000, Jon lost interest in selling Racy's cheap, low-grade Mexican brickweed. Seeking ways to free the bottlenecking of ideas and plans in his mind, he decided to change up his marijuana business by securing higher-quality product. He got himself a storage unit a few miles from where he lived with his dad and younger brother, Pax. The units were protected by a main gate passcode and barbed wire. He put a safe in the unit to secure his cash, weed, scales, and pipes. It eliminated worries of Dad finding drug paraphernalia in the house. Just a few months earlier, Jon had gotten busted after cutting a slit in the box spring of his bed and stuffed in marijuana, hand-blown pipes, a cigar box full of cash, and 2 digital scales he'd stolen from biology class. Unit 41 soon doubled as a party shack with a rug, tie-dye decor, pin-up girl posters, a table and chairs, a television, a video game system, and a pricey stereo to play ska punk, an alternative rock blend of ska and punk music. Jon modified the unit by unscrewing its only light bulb and rigging an adapter for plugging in a myriad of electronics. Unable to figure a way to override the timer connected to the main light, He would have to turn the knob every 30 minutes to keep the power from going out. Unit 41 was a way for Jon to attract and keep friends, but the only ones it drew were the boys who distributed weed for him. They'd go to the unit to smoke, weigh and bag, and hang out. Jon pursued a connection to higher quality bud, also called nugs. The boys who'd gotten Jon into dealing weed were buying their stuff from a supplier in a nearby village. Mateo would take bus trips to Texas and tote back weed in duffel bags. Jon heard Mateo had found a Canadian connection and started bringing back nugs from Canada that were rock hard and looked like acorns. The denser the nugs, the better the quality. It was just what he needed. Mateo was a fair-skinned Hispanic. A short guy, what he lacked in height he made up for in ornamentation. He was a peacock, a flashy dealer who wore heavy, thick gold chains and medallions. Mateo had multiple homes and vehicles, including a car with color-changing paint. He was arrogant and intimidating, and Jon had designs on him as a partner. Hoping to impress Mateo, Jon went to the dealer's house, presented a brick of cash in a see-through storage bag, and slapped it on the kitchen table. "I'll take whatever you got." It wasn't that simple. It was a struggle, a dance, a drug peddler two-step of wits. And it worked. It made Jon look serious. Not only did he walk away with all the weed he could afford, but soon the two were collaborating. They worked out an agreement. Jon would get a better rate if he helped Mateo bring weed from Canada. Mateo presented it as an opportunity, and Jon took the bait, not grasping he would be an international drug smuggler, an extremely risky crime with serious consequences. Jon would have little to gain, but for Mateo, it would cut out almost all the risk. In May 2000, Mateo and Jon took their first trip together to the border, driving about 4 hours north. They spent the night at a hotel in Messina, New York, the northernmost part of the state. Mateo went over how everything would go down. They would drive to the Indian reservation and call the Canadian connection. Once they got the green light, they'd drive up a dirt road and Mateo would drop off Jon. Jon would then follow what looked like an ATV trail through the woods until he reached a clear cut in a pile of rocks, like a blockade in the middle of the trail. Once he crossed the rocks, he would be in Canada. He would follow a trail through a hayfield, and where it curved, there would be a car. Jon would hand the guy in the car a bag of cash and get a bag of weed in return. Morning came fast and without much sleep. Excited and full of adrenaline, Jon rode with Mateo to the St. Regis Mohawk Reservation, where they ate breakfast at a Native American-themed restaurant, complete with a stuffed black bear. Though he was 1 year shy of being able to gamble legally, Jon played electronic gaming machines at the restaurant's casino until Mateo got word the Canadian connection was a go. Mateo drove up the dirt road and Jon got out. The sun almost directly overhead, he walked along, eyes wide at an impressive clear cut that looked like a massive bulldozer had cut an endless gash across the land. On the U.S. side was forest. On the Canadian side, hayfield and woods. The rock pile border was literally that, a load of melon-sized rocks dead center of the trail. He could have walked around either side. It was only as wide as a car. Instead, he climbed the rocks, stopping on top to look around. Jon was in the middle of nowhere, 1 foot in Canada, 1 in the U.S. As he followed the road into a hayfield that stretched to the horizon, he was self-assured and felt powerful, on the cusp of something important. The path curved, and on the bend, parked in the shade of the trees, wasn't a car, but a newer model 4-door pickup truck. He saw not 1, but 2 people in the front seat, 1 a woman. Uncertainty crept into his head as she rolled down the window and said all of 2 words, "Get in." Jon reluctantly opened the back door. He was shoving aside mounds of clutter to create room to sit when he overheard the man behind the wheel talking on the phone. "He's here." That's when he realized how alone he really was. Wide-eyed and silent, he experienced the first hint of worry that this might not go as planned. He swallowed his anxiety every time it crept up. Only one person knew he was there. The couple looked like modern-day hippies in their late 20s. The woman had jet black hair, while the man had a full head of red hair and a goatee, glasses, and a hat, looking like a music festival freak who'd done too much acid. He extended his arm into the back seat. "I'm Ghost." They made small talk about Jon's new role of drug mule, and it became clear the woman wasn't just along for the ride. She was an equal partner. Ghost told Jon the bag was in the trunk, and then wrenched his head around, twisting his body in the seat to look Jon in the eye. "If anyone on the Canadian side rolls up on you, drop the bag and run to the US. Do not let anyone catch you on the Canadian side with weed." Jon nodded slowly a couple of times, heeding the seriousness of the warning. He didn't know if it meant being caught with weed on the Canadian side would result in a legal nightmare, or if it would be putting Ghost at risk. He walked around back and saw a black and white hockey bag that had to be 5 feet long. You could stuff a body into it. Mateo had told Jon he didn't have to check the bag. It was always good. When these suppliers bagged the weed, they'd stuff in extra grams. Mateo had said the suppliers had so much weed to move, he'd call Ghost and get $75,000 worth of marijuana, no problem. That was about 50 pounds. The most they could stuff into a hockey bag was 20 pounds. As soon as Jon lifted the bag, the truck disappeared. This time when Jon got to the rock pile border, he walked around it. At 17, he'd just pulled off his first international drug run, which amounted to little more than an hour walk in the woods. He enjoyed the rush he got. It was a high he'd be chasing for years. The pair drove straight back home, where they split up the load. Jon got 5 pounds for just shy of 10 grand, which amounted to about a $6,000 discount. It meant he could undercut the other dealers, supplying his guys weed at a better price than anyone else. He started making more money than he could spend. He never ate at home anymore, not when there was cash to burn. He'd spend the night at friends' houses and, instead of packing a night bag, simply buy new clothes the next day. He'd get the latest CD player for his car every couple of months and buy $1,000 gold chains. He went on a radio-controlled car kick, buying high-end professional quality RC cars. One day he stopped in a hobby shop, and the owner was showing video games to a couple of teenagers. Shelving wrapped around the room near the ceiling, displaying RC cars already assembled and painted, some with custom chrome rims. One caught Jon's attention. A gas truck, chrome rims with street tires, and a rainbow metallic paint job like Mateo's car. "How much?" he asked. It wasn't for sale. "Name a price," said Jon, whose windfall bought him extra confidence. The owner threw out a price tag that was easily a couple $100 more than the car's value. Jon pulled out a wad of cash. He wouldn't forget the head snapping of the kids at the counter. Spending money recklessly, he bought 2 new dirt bikes for just less than $14,000. He didn't have anywhere to ride them, but the price tags came with bragging rights. He kept them in the storage unit. Jon threw parties at friends' houses and paid for kegs of beer. He'd go on shopping sprees for his 16-year-old girlfriend, Hannah, buying her clothes, cell phone, and jewelry, and sometimes leaving money on her fridge for the rest of her family. He'd smoke mountains of weed, smoke up friends, and carry bags of cash. As it became harder to hide his spending, Jon feared his dad would find out. Plus, he had to hide the miles he was putting on the car. After studying the car manual and learning the speedometer cable plugged into the transmission and controlled the odometer, Jon unplugged the speedometer. No speedometer, no odometer, no more crazy miles. He ended up going over the border legally a few times to meet Ghost and his girlfriend for dinner and drinks. The couple clicked more with Jon than Mateo because Mateo came across as a cocky, wannabe gangster, whereas Jon, with his sustained, quiet demeanor, was more unassuming. Ghost and his girl spoke French. They lived in a French-named town of 4 or 5 words, something de something Laville. Ghost hung out with bikers. Not big, burly bikers, but skinny, slicked-back hair, tattooed, wife-beater-wearing bikers. As for drug runs, Jon made a few more with Mateo, paying a slight markup, doing all of the work and assuming the most risk. Then everything fell apart. Mateo got arrested for carrying an unlicensed gun and went to jail. Jon began making solo trips to Canada, dealing with Ghost and the girlfriend on his own. Volume dropped sharply because he was only picking up product for himself. Ghost offered to get him more drugs, but Jon had no way to distribute it. He was supplying almost a dozen lower-level dealers in 8 communities. His markets were maxed out. Jon asked his friend Eddie to do a team trip with him. Eddie was about the same age as Jon. Jet black hair, he was like a crow, dark and mysterious. And when he talked, it was as though he was carefully thinking out each word before speaking it. On August 28th, Eddie was behind the wheel. They had camping gear in the back as a decoy, in case they were questioned by cops. They smoked weed on the drive, and then hid it under the floor mat. The boys headed north and did breakfast at the stuffed bear Native American place. Jon showed off the casino, and they tried their luck at the slot machines until Ghost gave them the go-ahead. The boys drove almost to the rock pile, mere feet from the Canadian border. Mateo would never have driven that far, but Jon was getting careless. The teens headed up the dirt trail, open land and blue sky overhead. On a normal day, Jon would walk until the path hooked slightly to the right, and Ghost would be waiting for him at the bend. But this would not be a normal day. Jon eyed something that hadn't been there before. Hay wagons. The boys were halfway up the road when suddenly pickup trucks drove out from behind the wagons, cutting across the fields and coming straight at them. "Turn around," he instructed Eddie. Before long, the trucks caught up. One rode alongside the boys, keeping pace. "You boys American?" asked the driver, dressed casually in a t-shirt. "Yeah," answered Jon. Playing dumb, he added, "Aren't you?" "Nope. This is Canada." "What do you mean? We're in Canada?" Jon kept walking. The man pointed to the rock pile and told him that was the demarcation. "Really?" said Jon. "I thought there would be a fence or something." Eddie never said a word. The teens walked with their eyes trained on the car, parked several hundred yards away. The man made small talk, puffed a funny-looking flat pack of cigarettes from his shirt pocket, and steered the truck with his elbow while trying to open it. He offered them a smoke. "No, we're good," Jon replied. "We don't smoke." He picked up his pace, all the while trying to figure out how to buy time to get close enough to the border to dash across it. He could never outrun a truck. The driver commanded, "Stop," and then got out of his truck. The vehicles following behind also stopped, and 2 men emerged. Jon and Eddie did an about-face and stood frozen when they saw that all 3 men had gun on their hips. "What are you, cops?" asked Jon. That's when they identified themselves as Royal Canadian Mounted Police. Jon started walking again and flippantly asked, "Where's your hat and horse?" "They're only for ceremonies. You need to stop walking." The agent warned that he'd already called U.S. Border Patrol, but Jon stepped it up, his heart beating as fast as his pace, and he could hear Ghost in his head telling him not to get caught on the Canadian side. He gave Eddie a stern command, "Run," and took off as fast as he could. Once they made it past the rock pile, they'd be on American soil, and the Canadian police couldn't touch them. Freedom was there, within reach. It was only about a football field away. They ran to the sound of Eddie's handcuffs whipping against each other, interrupted by shouts from the Canadian police. Jon didn't know if they were still in pursuit. He wouldn't look behind. It was all he could do to sprint with a bulky bag slung over his shoulder. A few feet from the pile, the boys didn't hesitate. They scrambled at top errant boulders blown around the rock pile, lurching backward and then forward, almost to the ground. They made it. Jon slung his backpack to the ground with a thud. Eddie bent over and rested his hands on his thighs. Jon stood tall, wiping sweat from his hair, waiting for his breathing to slow. Startled, he heard a noise. A pair of Border Patrol vehicles raced toward them. Jon looked behind and saw the Canadian police standing at the rock pile. Neither direction was safe. A New York State police vehicle joined the others, and soon troopers and Border Patrol agents were approaching on foot. One started in on them. "What are you boys doing here?" Despite struggling to catch his breath, Jon sounded remarkably calm. "We were just out for a hike, sir." "Mind if we take a look in your car?" "Go ahead," said Jon, with strategic confidence that made people think he had nothing to hide. Camping gear landed on the ground after the agent tossed it from the back seat. "Spur of the moment, we decided to go camping in the Adirondacks," said Jon. "Long ways from the Adirondacks," shouted the agent from the car. "We just kept driving. We thought the Adirondacks came up this far. It looked like it did on the map." Tearing through the car, the agent held up a bong and hollered, "Whose is this?" It took a pregnant pause for Eddie to respond. "It's mine." The boys watched nervously as the agent checked the cup holders and then began going through the glove box. The officer arched his back as though ready to exit the passenger's side, but instead took a step back and bent farther into the car, placing his torso on the floor. He pulled up the floor mat. "And this?" he asked, holding up the bag of weed they'd brought to smoke on the way. Without taking his eyes off him, the agent walked over to Jon. "Let's take a look at what you've got in that bag." Jon was too anxious to move, almost too anxious to breathe while watching the agent's hand navigate the zipper, exposing the edges of green paper, thin wads of bills. "What's all the money for?" Jon had his story. "I brought it for Eddie to gamble at the casino." "No, you didn't," said the agent. "I know exactly what you were doing. We've been watching that spot for a long time now. We know someone's been crossing there. We got you." "They didn't get me." Jon had to force down his thoughts to keep them from bursting out his mouth. "They got nothing. They got weed and they've got a bong, some cash. That's nothing. Cash isn't illegal." "Get in your car and follow me," ordered the agent, pointing at Eddie. He tossed up his head at Jon. "Not you. You're riding with me." From his waistband, he drew handcuffs and secured Jon's wrists. A 5-vehicle law enforcement convoy made its way back down the dirt track, out to the road, through the reservation. Jon took a last look at the stuffed bear Native American place from handcuffs. At the Fort Covington border station, agents converged on Eddie's car, pulling everything out, scanning the tires and checking under the hood. The kids sat in the station with a trooper who typed a report while asking questions. "Why didn't you cross at the border station?" Another trooper was testing the bag of weed and weighed it. 1/2 ounce. Jon was distracted watching the agent tag the bag. "We didn't know we crossed the border, ma'am," he said in his cop-calming voice, which was always sweeter for the females. "I never would have left the country intentionally. I'm on probation." He looked around the open room of desks and busy people and craned his neck to see if the cops who'd been searching Eddie's car were headed inside. "What are you on probation for?" she asked. Unauthorized use of a motor vehicle? You stole a car?
Sample complete. Ready to continue?